Okay, topic 1, for loops and range. A for loop is a loop that allows you to do an established number of iterations through a group of code commands. You can pre-establish this. It's not going to do it an infinite number of times. It can do it exactly how many times you want. And it can also iterate over objects like strings, sets, tuples, and dictionaries we've not done yet, but we'll see those soon. They're similar to lists, and we know what a list is. So you can have it loop over each item in a list. You can have it loop through each character in a string, and I'll show you some of that here in a little bit. Here's an example of one that loops a specified number of times using a range function. So this is Fibonacci sequence. If you don't know what Fibonacci is, please look it up. It's an interesting concept, but it generally is a series of numbers that starts with 0, 1, and then after that, each next number adds up the two previous numbers. So it goes 0, 1, and then 0 plus 1 is 1, and 1 plus 1 is 2, and 1 plus 2 is 3, 2 plus 3 is 5, 3 plus 5 is 8, 8 plus 5 is 13, etc., etc. It can go on forever. And we can build out a program that can do this for us. And this is just an example of, there's several different ways to do this, but the point here is that we're looking at the for loop option. So this program just takes, I'm going to set two variables, Fibonacci 1, Fibonacci 2, and then I'm going to start a for loop. And the structure of the for loop is you always say for, and then some variable, which you can be establishing right now. X didn't have to exist in the program. I'm saying for X in range 10. So that means I am going to do this 10 times. And each for loop in the range, this number will increase by 1. So for the first time through the loop, X is going to be 0. For the second time, X is going to be 1. Third time, X is going to be 2. And then it's going to go all the way up until X is 9, because you remember Python is 0 indexed, so it won't go to 10. It'll go 0 to 9. After X becomes 9, that'll be the last time through the loop, and then it will continue through the program. Now, obviously, this program ends at that point, but if you had more code in your program, it could continue on through that. And each one of these loops, this part's not as important, but it is kind of interesting. First, I'm going to print Fibonacci 1, which at the beginning of the program is going to be 0. And then I'm going to assign Fibonacci 1 to temp. And then I'm going to assign Fibonacci 2 to Fibonacci 1. And then I'm going to add up my temp, which is Fibonacci 1, plus my Fibonacci 2 to make my new Fibonacci 2. So what I'm doing is I'm just moving the variables across so I can do my addition. And then I can go back through the loop. And now, instead of Fibonacci 1 being 0 and Fibonacci 2 being 1, it'll end up being 1 and 1 for the next time through the loop. If you want to really follow through this program, I would suggest just either taking a notebook or something like that. Write these 3 variables and then just keep changing the variables for each time through the loop, and you can see how this works as it builds up the Fibonacci sequence. I'm going to run this here, and it's going to print out the first 10 digits of Fibonacci sequence. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times through the loop. If I change this to like 3 and run it again, you'll see that it only does 3. So it runs, range is the number of times it's going to go through the loop. Here's another example that actually utilizes that count variable in the loop. So X was assigned each time we went through the loop on that last one, but we didn't actually utilize it in any way. In this case, we're utilizing it within the loop. So here's a very simple loop. So I'm going to just start by saying m sum equals 0, and then I'm going to say for m in range 5, add m to m sum. And then once the whole loop is done, it'll print m sum. So on the first time through the loop, m is going to get assigned 0, and m sum, which is already 0, will add 0 to it, and it'll end up being 0. And then we'll come back to the beginning of the loop, and now m is going to be assigned 1, because it's our second time through the loop. M sum is now 0 plus the new m is 1, so now m sum becomes 1, and then it will loop again until it does it 5 times. So you end up adding up 0 plus 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, which ends up being, as you know, 10. So after it does the loop 5 times, it exits and then it prints the output. Continuing on, just some other things to know. For loops do not have to start at index 0. That's just the default. You can set the range and the step size, which step size is always defaults to 1, and the initial index always starts at 0, but we can override that. So here's an example that starts counting at 3 and goes with a step size of 3, and it ends when it is at 14 or greater. So here's the code. It's just a couple lines. But here's for m in range, and this is where I'm assigning my start. So I'm starting at 3, I'm ending at 14, and I'm counting by 3s. So I will get 3 on the first time around, because m will become 3, and it will print it out. Then on the second one, it's going to become 6. So m becomes 6, and then it prints m. And then on the third time through, I get 9, and on the fourth time through, I get 12. The fifth time through, it would attempt to be 15, which is no longer within the range. I'm going to make a slight adjustment here, and I want to show you this because this is important to remember. I'm going to change this to 15, and it is still not going to include it because the last step in the range is not included. So if I change this to 16, you're going to see that it includes it. See, the end of the range is not included. It's just something important to remember. Because otherwise you'll make mistakes where you'll accidentally go through a loop more than what you expect to. Here's a loop, a for loop that iterates through a list, as I had alluded to earlier. So I start by creating this list, and it's just a bunch of random floats here, some integers, etc. And then I'm going just to create an empty variable called SumUp, and then I'm going to create a variable called mult, which is multiply, and I'm going to set it to 1. And now in my for loop, I'm going to say for x in my number list. And what it does is on the first iteration through the list, it's going to assign x equal to 1.5. And then I utilize that in here. So on the first time through, I say SumUp equals SumUp plus x. So it would become 1.5 on the first time through the loop. And then multiply, this is the reason I set it to 1, because otherwise multiply would always end up being 0. Multiply multiplies 1 times 1.5, which then ends up being 1.5. And then on the second time through the loop, x is going to be assigned to the second number in the list. So I'm going to assign it to 55.5, and then SumUp is now, it's still, it's 1.5, so now I add 1.5 to 55.5, and I get my new SumUp, and then I multiply 1.5 times 55.5, and I get my new multiply. And then once it goes through this whole list, it would iterate 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. It will exit that loop, and then I'm going to print both of those values out. And you can see the addition becomes that number, and the multiplication becomes that gigantic number. So I am utilizing each item in my list as a step in my for loop. This is a pretty powerful thing to do if you're working in any kind of a data analysis, data function, putting a whole bunch of data into a list and then iterating over that list and either doing something directly to the list or utilizing the data in the list to do some analysis. This is commonly used, so it's something you want to get comfortable with.